Okay, this is just a quick video to do the group exercises from 4.3. So I'm just going to kind of buzz through those a second. Here's the first one. All right. We just got to identify all this typical stuff. So amplitude. Well, we've got a -3 multiplying the sign. All right. Amplitude's always positive, so absolute value. And there we go. Period, 2 pi over, well, we've got a 2 right there. All right, so our period is just pi. Center line, y equals, and that would be this guy out front, -1. So on the graph, we'll mark -1, and I'm going to put this in for our center line. And then amplitude of 3, so 1, 2, 3 down. We'll get our valleys down there. 1, 2, 3 up. We'll get our peaks for our wave up there. And this does not have anything added or subtracted from the x, so there's no shift in the graph at all. So it's going to start at 0. We just need to mark off the rest, and actually those go they're not too bad since we just got a period of pi. 1 whole pi, so this would be half a pi, and this would be a quarter of a pi. This would be 3/4 of a pi. Splitting that whole pi up into 4 nice even chunks. Alright, then we just got to remember the middle is at -1, and we have a negative sine function. So we're going to start in the middle like the sine functions do, but go down because it's negative. So down to the bottom, gotta turn around, middle, top, middle to finish off, and there's your sine wave. All right. Number 2. Y equals cosine pi over 3x plus pi over 3. All right, now this one has the issue that we talked about in one of the examples in the lecture part, where we have addition, subtraction going on inside here, but it's not grouped off in parentheses with something then multiplying the set of parentheses. So we got to do a little factoring here to start. So step 1 is to write this as, well, it's going to be pi over 3 multiplying x, and it's a plus sign, and the question is what goes right here, so that if you did redistribute, you'd get pi over 3. Well, what do you multiply by pi over 3 to get pi over 3? Well, yeah, that'd just be a 1. Or in other words, if you factor out pi over 3 from pi over 3, you're still left with a 1. All right, so amplitude, nothing out front, so that's a 1. Center line, well, nothing being added, subtracted anywhere, so just the x-axis. Period, 2 pi over, here's our b, pi over 3. So that's 2 pi times dividing by a fraction, same as multiplying by a reciprocal. So actually the pi's cancel and we just get 6. All right. So the only other thing is, where does this start and where does it end? All right. Now remember, the basic form for these is that in the parentheses we have x minus h, and the function starts at x equals h then. So we have a 1 here, but we have a plus sign. So in other words, this corresponds to h equals -1. So this is an example where the graph that we would have had otherwise gets shifted to the left, actually, instead of to the right. So this is going to start at x equals -1 and end at x equals -1 plus however long one cycle is, and that's what the period is. So there's a 5. So this one's actually going to go to the left of the y-axis into negative territory, so we've got to keep that in mind. Starting at -1, ending at 5. Now we still want to plot those 5 key points, so we got to take this section and break it up into 4 nice equal pieces. So we got to find this number, that number, that number. Now, halfway in between -1 and 5, you might be able to just think about that for a second, figure it out. But otherwise, 1/2, add them up. So 1/2 times 4 is 2. Halfway in between 2 and 5, well, it's 3.5 basically. Or in other words, add 2 and 5, get 7. Multiply by 1/2, and you got 7/2. In between -1 and 2, well, if you add them up, you would get +1, and then you multiply by 1/2 and get 1/2, like so. Alright, then that'll do it. I didn't mark off anything on the y-axis, but our amplitude is just 1, and the x-axis is our center line. And then we have a cosine, and it's positive in front, so remember, cosine starts at the top. So here we are. Remember, this is our starting spot, and that's the top. So then we would have to go down and hit the middle at the next key spot, continue to the bottom, and then work our way back up. And get a nice little cosine curve like so. Alright, so that was number 2. Number 3 and 4. Here we start getting everything in the mix. So number 3, y equals 2 plus 5 sine 1/4 x minus pi over 2. There we go. Alright, so here it goes. Amplitude, sitting right there at 5. Center line, well, we got a 2 added on there. And it's worth pointing out, in case you haven't noticed this before, these are the 2 things that affect the y-axis, and those are the 2 numbers that appear outside the trig function, outside the sine or cosine. The 2 things that affect the horizontal position and what we mark on the x-axis, that's the stuff inside. Alright, so vertically, alright, so center line is 2. 5 units up and down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Minus 3. So there's our top, middle, and bottom for our wave. Period 2 pi over 1/4. So again, dividing by fraction, same as multiplying by reciprocal. It's reciprocal. So we get 8 pi. Alright, but that doesn't mean that this thing ends at 8 pi. That just tells you how long one basic cycle is. Alright. This one has a horizontal shift to it right there. That's our h from our generic formula. So this thing starts at pi over 2, ends at pi over 2 plus the length of one cycle, which is exactly what the period means. So plus 8 pi. Alright, so we got to put those together. Now, you could look at this as, well, this is 8 whole pies plus half a pi. That gives you 8.5 pies. And you could go from there with the mixed number. Otherwise, this is pi over 2 plus, we want to make that over 1 and multiply the bottom by 2. We got to multiply the top by 2. So 17 total pi, 1 pi plus 16 pies over 2. So we'll start at pi over 2, and we will end at 17 pi over 2. And then we got to figure out what's in the middle. Alright, well, now again, maybe just think of this with the same denominators of 2. They both have a pi, so this fraction, whatever it is, it's going to have a pi in it. What's halfway in between 1 pi and 17 pi? All right, well, if you add 1 to 17, you get 18. You chop it in half, you get 9. So is this going to be 9 pi over 2? Well, yes, it is. 1/2 of pi over 2 plus 17 pi over 2 is 1/2 of, add them up, 18 total pi's over 2. This just cancels that 2, and we get a 9, and sure enough, 9 pi over 2. So yeah, really, with all these denominators and all the pi's, well, 1 and 9. Pi over 2, pi over 2. Halfway in between 1 and 9. Or 1 plus 9 is 10. Chop it in half, and that's 5. 9 plus 17 is 26. Chop that in half, you get 13. So 13 pi over 2. And so this is when you can really see the nice even spacing. You're just increasing that number in the denominator by 4 every time. So to 5, to 9, to 13, to 17. All right, so there's everything marked off. We just got to plot our key points. Sine function, positive. So we'll start in the middle and go up. So at our next key point, up top. And we got to work our way back down and finish where we started. And there's our sine function, like so. All right, one more. Number 4. If you looked at the filled in notes, you'll see there's quite the mess in terms of the function that was getting used, because I changed it a few times, but just didn't change much on the notes. Your copy should look much nicer. Okay, here goes. Amplitude. Well, it's negative 12, but again, we take the absolute value, so amplitude is 12. Center line, got this nice guy sitting in front, so at 5. So that's the vertical stuff. Inside stuff. Well, again, it's not 7 and then x plus or minus something in parentheses, so we need to factor this a little bit. So we're going to take a 7. This is going to be x. And we need to figure out what goes right here. So we're going to have 5 minus 12 cosine. So what if we multiply this by 7, we should get pi over 3. So there's clearly got to be a pi on the top. What needs to be on the bottom so that when you multiply by 7, it cancels and you get 3? And if you said 21 in your head, totally right. All right, so there's that form that we need. So the period is 2 pi over 7. What a beaut that is. Doesn't simplify at all. And our start, well, x equals pi over 21. So this is going to end at x equals the start plus the length of one cycle, and that's the period. So, well, we need a common denominator. We can turn 7 into 21, so times 3 times 3. So pi over 21 plus 6 pi over 21 is 7 pi over 21, which happens to be just pi over 3. Okay. Well, let's see here. So our center line is at 5. So then with the amplitude of 12, we got to go up and down that much. So up plus 12 would get us to 17, minus 12 would get us to negative 7. All right, our start, pi over 21. Our end, pi over 3. All right, so this may be the ugliest example that we've looked at in terms of getting these guys right. So what's halfway in between here? Well, 1/2 pi over 21 plus, remember this came from 7 pi over 21, so that's what we need for the common denominator. So we get 1/2 times, that adds up to 8 pi's on top, 21 on the bottom. Little cancel, and we get 4 pi over 21. Alright, so how about this guy? 1/2. At least we got the same denominator already. So that adds up to 5 pi's over 21 with no canceling, so 5 pi over 42. Alright. So then when we do it with these two guys, well, 4 pi, this again is 7 pi over 21. So we'd add those up and get 11 pi on top. And the common denominator at 21, but again with the 1/2, so this has also got a 42 on the bottom. Alright, so there's our 5 key spots. Here's our center line. A negative cosine. Cosine starts at the top, except when it's negative, it gets flipped upside down, so we're starting at the bottom. From there to the middle and up to the top, and then work our way back down so we finish where we started. There it is. Alright, that was the group exercises then, and that'll be it for this video.